Sequels are weird. Like, I get the concept. A thing does well, people come to like said thing, creators of the thing want to make more of the thing so the thing can continue to exist in perpetuity. But in the world of video games, deviate too much from the thing in the sequel, and people start thinking of the thing as not the thing anymore. Got all that? I, of course, am talking about Zelda 2: The Adventure of Link. This NES sequel to The Legend of Zelda is wildly different from not just the first game, but every subsequent Zelda game. It is the definitive black sheep of the Zelda family. That's what makes the game so special. It doesn't deserve its bad reputation. Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Completionist New Game Plus, the show where I am recompleting the first 120 games I ever featured here on the channel. More on that in the boxes down below. Now today's episode is a real interesting one. I actually think that Zelda 2 is an incredible game, a pretty solid RPG, especially for the time that it released, because on the end...
Mr. Jerd Completionist, something, nerd.
Ted, you work for me. Why are you in my shot ruining this episode?
Oh, you're being served soon court.
Being served? You work for me. What court do you work for? Ridiculous. Comes and serves me my opening intro. What the hell? Gerard the Completionist, you are being summoned to appear before the court of the internet. Failure to respond may subject you in a fine, incarceration, or both, as well as performance of jury service. What are you... Oh, the original episode of Zelda 2 was a crossover with my show Defend It, in which I defended Zelda 2 from the internet, and thus I'm redoing it again, because that's what that episode was. Oh, this sucks. I hate this. This is double jeopardy. I'm claiming double jeopardy. I can't be tried for the same thing twice in this totally real internet court. Let's go!
And the battle continues. Could turn it all around! Defend it!
Your Honor, this is ridiculous. We're on the tail end of a pandemic, and besides, I've got GeForce hosting duties. I'm kind of a big deal now.
Oh, please, like that's even an excuse. We do everything over Zoom these days. We're not even in the same room. I'm not even wearing pants. I haven't in over a year. 2 years.
I do not want to picture that. All right, Your Honor. Permission to move forward with the rewind as our format is established before Budinsky here ruins the whole New Game Plus format.
Who are you calling Budinsky? Don't make me come over there and floss.
I'll floss! I'll floss on you! I'll floss back! You wanna go? I don't even know what floss is, and I'll do it. I'll do it.
Order! We will have order in this court. You may proceed, Gerard.
The Legend of Zelda established a winning formula, from the exploration, to the difficulty, to the genuine curiosity it evoked in players to comb every inch of the map. Especially for 1986, this game showed that video games could actually make players feel like they were exploring a whole new world full of secrets and possibilities. Ever since that first epic adventure, Zelda's been associated with fantasy wonderment and satisfying mechanics. Zelda games have shown that exploring an overworld, battling through puzzle-filled dungeons, and finding unique items to perform those first two actions over and over again is a home run. Whether in top-down 2D or full 3D, players know what to expect from a Zelda game. It's one of Nintendo's most enduring franchises for a very big reason. But Zelda 2 doesn't really feel like it follows The Legend of Zelda's footsteps at all. It's very, very weird. As a direct sequel, it's utterly baffling.
I'm pretty sure utterly baffling is just a nice way to say bad.
Thank you for that, Budinsky.
Gah, fine. I'll be quiet for now. Because I want to. I am not a Budinsky.
Sure. Though only the second ever Zelda game, The Adventure of Link is so wildly different from anything else related that it's rarely discussed with the same reverence of other Zeldas. To be blunt, people hate this game, so much so that I already did a Defend It crossover episode to fully express my thoughts. But just because Zelda 2 is different doesn't automatically make it bad.
Just let the record show that I think different is bad.
I'm sorry, what was that?
Nothing.
Plot, unlike the rest of the game, feels pretty familiar to other Zelda stories. Ganon's minions are pissed about their leader's defeat at the hands of Link in the first game. Zelda is in an enchanted slumber, and Link can only awaken her by gathering 6 powerful items from across Hyrule and finding the Triforce of Courage. Meanwhile, the servants of Ganon want to stop Link and revive their master with Link's blood. Now that's metal as hell. Link has to traverse a huge map on his way to the Great Palace to find the Triforce, awaken Zelda, and once again save Hyrule. So the plot might be pretty standard Zelda stuff, but it's more personal because Ganon's minions feel like they have a vendetta against Link. And though the plot shares elements with other Zeldas, everything else feels very different. The biggest difference with Zelda 2 is obvious to anyone with eyes. A bunch of it is in side-scrolling 2D. Even the opening of the game, Link is standing next to the slumbering princess. All 2D. That's not to say that other Zelda titles didn't experiment with 2D style. Link's Awakening has several sections where Link moves from left to right and jumps on Goomba's heads, but the majority of battles and dungeons in Zelda 2 takes place horizontally. It still feels unusual for this series. But the divisive nature of side-scrolling combat wasn't the only thing different about Zelda 2. This game also features a life system, and if Link goes down to 0 lives and gets a game over, players are sent all the way back to the very beginning of the game. For the first and only time in Zelda, Link gains experience points in battles that he can put towards attack, health, and magic. This game completely broke the formula that had been established in The Legend of Zelda. But for me, I thought this was totally normal. When I first played Zelda 2, like the very first time I played it as a kid, I just thought that's what video games did. Super Mario Bros. Was one way, and Super Mario Bros. 2 was another. It was completely different, and that's how games worked. The Legend of Zelda had its own thing going, and Zelda 2 was a weird RPG with 2D side-scrolling combat. To me, this made perfect sense. It's only with hindsight and seeing how Zelda games developed over time that I came to understand just how experimental Zelda 2 actually was. Zelda 2 actually feels more linear in some ways than Zelda 1, making completion fairly straightforward. Beat the game's 6 palaces and the Great Palace in Ganon, and on the way, max out my stats. That means taking magic, attack, and life to level 8 by earning enough experience points through battles. And of course, it wouldn't be a completed Zelda if I didn't find all 4 of each heart container and magic containers in the overworld, increasing my life and magic meter along the way. There are a handful of items found in palaces that give Link more traversal options, and there are 2 secret sword techniques, the downward and upward thrusts, to learn as well, by finding 2 swordsmen in certain towns. But the journey to do all of these things is what makes Zelda 2 unusual. When I first completed Zelda 2 on the show, it was when I was reviewing the games on the Legend of Zelda Collection Pack, a promotional disc for Nintendo GameCube that collected 4 classic Zelda titles. Thinking about it, it's wild that Nintendo even put Zelda 2 in this collection at all. First on there is Zelda 1, which makes sense. Ocarina of Time, yes, obviously. Majora's Mask was definitely a weird choice for sure, but not nearly as controversial as Zelda 2. And the biggest upset of all is how the hell A Link to the Past is not featured on this collection. And I gave Zelda 2 an in-between rating of finish it or play it. Found it hard, but enjoyable and extremely unique. And yet, of course, the internet disagreed with me, because that's what the internet does. Nitpick and pile on until the actual merits of the thing are buried under an avalanche of negativity. But in replaying Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link, I still found a lot to love. We know that Zelda 2 has individual elements that are unlike any other mechanics in Zelda games. Some people find these bad. I like them, and in fact, I think that some of them should even be brought back into the Zelda toolbox. Zelda 2's uniqueness makes it stand out from other games of its type, and should not have been dismissed by the world at large so quickly.
Hold it!
Alright, here we go. What do we want to share with the court today, Mr. Internet?
Cool, those lovey-dovey jets, my old frenemy. Just because we haven't challenged each other in a while doesn't mean my takes are any less spicy. I'm like a Popeye sandwich, where responding to someone on TikTok is your bestie. And my take is just as fresh as ever. Zelda 2 is trash. Garbage. Zelda 2, The Adventures of Link is far and away the worst Zelda game, and in fact, is barely a Zelda game at all. So suck on that.
All right. Nuance as ever I see in this courtroom, Judge.
You know it, brah. I'm like a K-pop TikTok dance. Up in your face without even asking.
What does that even mean?
Order! Order in this totally real, not at all made up for the internet courtroom in which I am the judge. I am the judge, right? I am the judge, according to Ted, who is off screen in this very real, incredibly important internet court where we debate topics of great importance.
Sorry, Your
Apologies,
Honor.
Your Honor.
Damn right you are. All right, internet. What have you got?
Your Honor, this case is over before it's even begun. We've already had this argument, and I laid out that Zelda 2 simply fails in every respect. First, the different gameplay and visual styles make Zelda 2 feel disorienting and disjointed, like seeing Daddy Elon Musk dressed as Wario on SNL. Next, the life system and RPG elements feel dated now, and did then too. Finally, even Miyamoto himself said it was the worst game he ever had a hand in creating. Everyone says it's bad, and therefore, it is. Zelda 2 is a full-on waste of time that simply does not hold up in this day and age. Boom, case closed.
Objection, misleading the audience.
Sustained.
Permission to go off on a few tangents?
I'll allow it.
So first off, the changes in gameplay and visual style aren't disorienting at all. They're engaging. Zelda 1 introduced a top-down formula, and Zelda 2 keeps the sense of exploration intact. In fact, it deepens the RPG-like elements of the original game. Zelda 2 introduces actual towns, and it feels like the original Dragon Quest in how it transitions from overworld to towns. Zelda 2 is a departure from Zelda 1, yes, but that doesn't automatically detract from the game. It's experimental, and if anything, it lays the groundwork for a ton of future Zelda staples. The fact that you can encounter towns and talk to the townspeople is a huge deal. Yes, these features aren't nearly as refined as they had eventually become, but completing this game helped me appreciate that I had to talk to everyone in towns all over the place to find out where to go and what to do.
If I may interject, Your Honor, talking to NPCs to find clues to the next area in Zelda 2 barely works. I am error? Come on!
Okay, actually, the whole I am error thing is pretty much a joke that nobody understood at the time. There's another character in a different village named Bagu who tells players to find error. Bagu is basically a phonetic translation of that character's Japanese name, whereas error was just translated as error. The joke is that there's a character named Bug, like software bug, with a brother named Error, so it's not that big of a controversy as everyone thinks it is. Moving on. The 2D combat is very unexpected, to be sure, yes, and playing this NES game on today's consoles like the Switch or even the NES Classic can take some adjusting of expectations. But I would argue that it's hardly disorienting. If anything, it's easy to pick your battles because you can see enemies on the overworld before you even engage with them. That alone feels unusual for the games released in the 80s. I actually think that combat is really fun and engaging once you get the timing. Instead of just mindlessly slashing, Zelda 2 forces the player to attack at certain points and wait for openings. Again, for the time, pretty freaking cool, considering the combat of the first game didn't really require much thought.
Yeah, but this game is, no cap, impossible to complete without a guide. It's hard to navigate.
Kids today won't know the struggle of what it's like to nearly beat the Great Palace and get sent all the way back to the beginning. Everyone should feel the pain of playing old games like we did in olden times.
See, you're trying to rile me up, Mr. Internet. It's not going to work. Zelda 2 is NES hard, yes. There is not a lot of in-game tutorialization. If you were playing it when it came out, you were basically expected to have the player's manual in front of you the entire time. But nowadays, Zelda 2 is more accessible than ever thanks to the NES Online app. And there's even an option to play a special version of the game that's significantly easier, so people can decide for themselves if the difficult journey to completion is something they want to engage with by themselves or not. Not to go on a rant here, but it's always difficult to judge an older game like this on its own merits. Yeah, people played and completed games differently in the 80s than we do now. Especially with a game as notoriously difficult as Zelda 2, it can be hard to recommend to new players whose first Zelda game was, I don't know, the Breath of the Wild or the Link's Awakening remake. The SP mode on the Switch Online service starts Link off with a lot more life, magic, and spells than players would begin with the game normally. I don't think this option to play with some softened edges cheapens the experience at all. Yeah, completionists will want to find all that stuff on their own by beating the main dungeons and grinding in battles, but it's great to give newbies an easier way in rather than just dumping them into the deep end and right away. Just because I had to struggle as a kid doesn't mean the average person today has to as well. I'll admit, I played this game using a guide, but I fully believe that no one who worked in this game would be offended by that. The instruction manual even came with a rudimentary map and a detailed walkthrough of the first palace. There are some super confusing secrets in Zelda 2, and even some basic progression that is extremely difficult to figure out without some sort of outside help. Players are not meant to go in totally cold. There aren't nearly as many heart containers or magic containers as you might expect in Zelda 2. Only 4 of each, and they're just out there for anybody to pick up. It's impossible to collect them all without finding all the items from the palaces, since these items let Link break boulders and cross bodies of water. Collecting every item is something you have to do to complete this game anyway, so it doesn't seem like a great leap to go from finding every item to maxing out the health and magic meters as well. There's still plenty to struggle with when completing Zelda 2. The life system does feel kind of archaic at this point. Hitting that game over screen and being sent all the way back to the beginning of the game is particularly brutal, but Zelda 2 gives players the tools to ameliorate the pain. In fact, once players reach the Great Palace, if they get a game over, they just restart there instead of the very beginning. And Zelda 2's very design as an action RPG lets players grind, making some aspects of the game significantly easier. The instruction booklet even recommends this, which is kind of cool. This is the first Zelda game to introduce the concept of grinding into that universe. I see shadows of grinding in other Zelda games as well, like finding arrows, bombs, or fairies. But Zelda 2, it's literally how players get stronger until making it to the Great Palace. It's entirely possible to complete enough battles and make Link's defense super strong, making a lot of encounters trivial. Yes, there's still the risk of losing all your lives and being sent back to the very start, but to me, it always felt like Nintendo was giving me the tools to play the adventure of Link however I wanted to. If I wanted to sit and grind and overlevel myself, I could totally do that. If I wanted to make this more of a skillful experience, I could move through the game barely leveling up at all. I sometimes imagine what if Nintendo had carried forward more RPG-like concepts into future Zelda titles. Indulge me in a flight of fancy. The same basic tenets of Zelda 2, where you can level up magic power and physical attacks just by fighting battles. Alright, so maybe that's just Zelda Skyrim, but come on, we'd all definitely play that, right?
That's the thing. We'll never have that because old Papa Miyamoto called this the worst Zelda game. I know it, you know it, everyone knows it, bearded weirdo.
And again, this is just the internet spinning up a controversy where there isn't one. In an interview with Steven Totillo, when asked a follow-up question on whether he'd ever made a bad game, Miyamoto clarified that he wished he could have done more with Zelda 2. But he was really talking about hardware limitations, and how he hoped the team could have done more than what was planned. He never trashed Zelda 2, he simply expressed that even if given the chance, he'd expand on some of the great ideas already present in the game. When re-completing this game, I was struck by how much influence Zelda 2 has had on the rest of the series. The fast-paced action-oriented combat with unlockable fighting techniques was totally resurrected in Twilight Princess. Dark Link, practically a series staple at this point, and introduced here as the real final boss in Zelda 2. The powerful magic spells reappear in a much more streamlined form in Ocarina of Time, and that famous downward stab, definitely a major influence factor in one of my favorite games of all time, Shovel Knight. Everyone talks about the DuckTales pogo jump, but Shovel Knight was definitely influenced by Zelda 2. And not to mention, it's a great move in Smash Brothers.
Yeah, well, whatever. I guess Zelda 2 is fine, but you'll never convince me that it's great, because there aren't any completion bonuses. Check and mate.
You know what? You're not wrong. Zelda 2 may be action-oriented and RPG influenced, but after fighting through all 6 palaces, finding every item, and reaching max level, the game doesn't really give you anything extra at all to show for it. Zelda 2: The Adventure of Link, contrary to the opinion of the internet, may be a better game than a lot of people remember, but it still doesn't have a lot to offer with regards to completionists.
Ha! He admits it! Your Honor, this is utterly preposterous. I move this case be thrown out immediately, Gerard gets shamed, and gives me $5 in an assortment of esoteric crypto. I want $3 in KFC Cluck Bucks, and $2 all in Pizza Hut pennies.
If I may, yes, completing Zelda 2 doesn't unlock anything particularly special. There's the option to play through the game again, New Game Plus style, but it doesn't really add anything new. There are no secret bonuses or Easter eggs to be earned, but that doesn't make it a bad game. I enjoyed my time recompleting it because I was reminded that Nintendo has been innovating forever. And though Zelda 2 will never approach the iconic status of A Link to the Past or Ocarina of Time, it still deserves the credit for introducing so many awesome things to the canon. And come on, where would Zelda be without that rockin' dungeon theme? And if you don't finish the game, you actually don't get to fight Dark Link, so you have to make it all the way to the very end. Yeah, I would have loved some extra things for maxing out my levels and finding every item, but at least the game didn't give me a literal pile of poop after spending hundreds of hours finding Korok seeds.
You know what? I'll take that little bit of salt and give you that point. I hope the record reflects that I'm not all bad.
Sure, yeah, I'm sure our highly paid stenographer is on that.
When I recompleted Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link, there were 6 palaces fought throughout, plus the Great Palace where I didn't fight Ganon. 8 overall deaths, which is not that bad when you think about how difficult this game is. 4 hours of total playtime. 4 heart containers and 4 magic containers found. And 1 song that is absolutely the hottest Zelda musical track of all time. Yeah, you know what's up. That dungeon theme is so sexy. I may have a contentious relationship with the internet, but it isn't all bad. Because at the end of the day, Zelda 2 is a good game. Different than what Zelda fans might have expected, but a solid game nonetheless.
Well, it doesn't have any completion bonuses, which definitely means it must suck. But I guess I'm willing to admit that there are some salvageable parts that make Zelda 2: The Adventures of Link memorable.
Hold on. Did we just come to an amicable conclusion? Without any death threats, doxing, or changing the subject to complete non sequiturs?
What? No, never! This is contentious! Zelda 2 is the worst! You're... Oh, I hate you! Okay, bye.
You'll love to see it. Seriously, Zelda 2: The Adventure of Link is not as terrible as everyone says. Yes, it's NES hard, but it's easier to play now with the help of our friend, the internet. There's plenty of Zelda DNA that originated right here. And yes, it has its issues, mainly that it's nearly impossible to complete without a little outside help. Save yourself the trouble of wandering aimlessly around and use a guide. So, I'm gonna make a slight tweak of my original rating here. I'm giving Zelda 2: The Adventure of Link my completionist rating of finish it, with an asterisk being find and use a decent guide so you can actually enjoy and complete the game.
Finish it!